Hi everyone, thank you for attending and welcome to the Asia and Oceania Student Research Committee of IAPS lecture by Eyrin on femininity and gender-based violence cases from North Korea. As mentioned, this lecture is recorded, so if you turn on your cameras, you will consent to your image being recorded and your voice being recorded if you turn on your microphone. So thank you all for attending, and I will now hand it over to Eyrin.
Great, thank you very much. So before we get started on the topic of femininity and gender-based violence in North Korea, we have to do a brief introduction, maybe a couple of disclaimers on what this lecture is, what it isn't, and what the purpose and limitations are. Well, this is not a lecture and definitely not an expert talk. It is more of an expose of information and perhaps a collection of research materials and thoughts on a topic that, in my opinion, is frequently overlooked when talking about human rights abuse in North Korea. The purpose is to perhaps inform, to discuss, definitely not to educate anyone or to reach any conclusions. An important limitation is that the information included has been gathered from secondary sources, and as always with data coming from North Korea, we cannot be absolutely certain of their validity. On disclaimers, please note the following. One, this would be a gendered talk, gendered language, with a focus on traditional gender roles and stereotypes. If you're bothered by that, maybe gender in North Korea is not the session you should be listening to. And there will also be graphic content, so viewer discretion is advised. There will not be any images, but the commentary might be heavy. I will also give another opportunity for people to leave the room before I start with a really heavy abuse stuff in North Korea. So after these long introduction and disclaimer, let's get started. What is femininity? And what is femininity in North Korea? So this part is taken by an analysis from Kyriakidi in 2019, who states that the femininity is comprised by traditional traits viewed from a North Korean point of view, such as kindness, modesty, empathy, and caring. But they're also woven with civic activism, or as I view it, they're there with a North Korean twist. It's patriotism, it's devotion to the regime, it's economic and political participation within certain limitations. So while forming her view on femininity and what it means to be a woman in North Korea, Kim goes on to analyze the monthly magazine Korean Woman, whose cover for the first issue of 2020 you will see right now in lovely revolutionary red. And if you notice, there is the woman holding a trophy, but she's dressed in, let's say, a more modern outfit, perhaps, her and the one next to her again behind. But the forerunner is a woman in a hanbok in traditional Korean clothing. So this monthly magazine, Korean Woman, is published by the Democratic Women's Union of Korea since 1946. That is North Korea, obviously. There will not be a differentiation. And I think I would add actually that it's been published with the blessing of the regime and it's directly affected by the regime, as there is no chance it would have been published for that long without following official guidelines. So the magazine publishes information on every aspect of life, including history, ideology, ethics. And while the magazine often mentions both parents as being caregivers, the role of the caring mother is on the spotlight. It is a woman's obligation to have children and educate them and turn them consequently into good and productive citizens. From that point of view, women are directly responsible, not only for bringing more citizens into the world, but if you think about it in a way, in maintaining the regime, in transforming the children into citizens who will adore the supreme leader and who will perpetuate the leader's teachings. So this image of the mother, who of course is a product of the revolution that North Korea has brought to the world and keeps bringing into the world, is vital to the state. And a woman must be a mother to be a good citizen. So when we speak about femininity in North Korea, we imply maternity. these topics, maternity and femininity, these concepts are intertwined. They cannot be broken apart because it is a woman's job both to be kind, modest, empathetic, caring, all of that. But a woman at some point of her life will be a mother. There is no, in the regime eyes, there is no option. This is non-negotiable. Like there are not even discussions on it. But what are other expressions of femininity? Because saying, okay, you're feminine if you're a mother might be a bit weird to some people. And how are those expressions linked to the role of women in North Korea? What is even that role? Well, this is one of my favorite parts when talking about women in North Korea, and it might come as a surprise to some people, but women were the forerunners in establishing a market economy in the country, transforming into the primary breadwinners of the family. This photo was taken by the Financial Times. It is one of the few legal markets operating in North Korea. Most of the markets are illegal with direct consequences for the women who operate them. And there is a crackdown, unfortunately, but even the government has understood that at some point, some markets must exist. So within this market economy, capitalism and fashion are actually gaining ground. Maybe that's why the regime is cracking down on them, capitalism. Now, fashion is yet another cliche when talking about women, right? Interestingly, the predominant influencer, if you will, in North Korea is none other than Lee Sol-juk, who is Kim Jong-un's wife, the supreme leader's wife. She is considered the epitome of, the well-dressed person, the well-dressed woman in North Korea. And every time there are public appearances, her style is what people talk about, her makeup, her handbags predominantly. So we see an increase in fake designer items, in makeup and jewelry throughout the entire country, inspired by the First Lady. According to Dalton and Tong, although women are the primary agents in the market, unfortunately, they're still out-earned and have fewer career opportunities than men. Therefore, dressing up is examined as part of the literature as a tactic of women to regain agency or to develop agency and signal status, ultimately achieving financial independence or having better chances to find a good match. Personally, I'm more fond of women reclaiming agency to elevate their own status and not to just get married for the sake of following gender stereotypes. And I would like to believe that this is what is happening, and that is why women are developing their own shadow economy in the country. So seemingly the role of women is improving, at least from what we have seen. Legally speaking, there is gender equality. Financially, women can out-earn the husbands if the husbands are employed in the government, for example, with payment and wage freezes that are happening in the country. Yet this newly found economic liberation in combination with the absence of state-funded childcare facilities has led women to be both the primary financial and childcare supporters. Therefore, with a closer look, maybe we can start thinking that North Korean women are not that different from a woman in a Western country who has to balance a career and a household. This is not something that many people would expect to listen, how women, let's say, in Spain or in France, how similar they might be to a woman in North Korea. At this point, we will start linking femininity to gender-based violence and heading into heavier content. So this is your final warning to leave the session. So financial independence and wanting a better future, I hope can argue with that. A way for women and for men, but predominantly for women, to escape and to, let's say, have a better life is to defect or seek refuge to China, depending on the terminology that you want to use. Approximately 70% of North Korean refugees to China are women. Now, women have greater chances of successfully escaping to North Korea, yet the sole reason is that they are being trafficked. It's not out of anyone's good heart that they take for women and lead them out of the country. So with the promise of employment, they are moved to China and forced into prostitution, forced marriages, and working under slave-like conditions. Should those women get caught, they are forcefully repatriated to North Korea, considered as less than humans, especially if they get pregnant, because now they carry that quote-unquote Chinese seed, and they have been tainted. There has been actually a recorded case in the literature that I read of a woman who was 8 months pregnant and had to go a forced abortion. And even inside the country, for those who do not escape or for those who are caught and returned, sexual violence is not uncommon. The public sector is dominated by men, and women who work in the markets must frequently bribe security agents, sometimes with sex. As a result of sexual violence, unmarried women who become pregnant turn to illegal and dangerous abortions. Now, it is worth mentioning that violence against women is illegal in North Korea. So from a legislative point of view, women are very well protected. Well, rather well protected, or very well protected, because in reality, when the perpetrators are those who are supposed to protect you, like the security agent, the law becomes rather irrelevant. Punishments are also quite lenient, and they have become more and more lenient in the past few years. For example, the punishment is less than 2 years of disciplinary labor for, quote, forcing subordinate women to have sexual intercourse, end of quote. So in simple words, raping a woman at work will land someone 2 years of disciplinary labor, of forced labor. In detention facilities, women are predominantly handled by men, by male guards, resulting in rapes, forced abortions, even infanticide, among other consequences and punishments. So that goes the idea of having more children for the state, and women as kind of caring mothers of the nation. Rejecting sexual advances can lead to a woman being moved to harder posts within the facility. For example, from being a cook to a more labor-intensive position, or even to rape, humiliation, beating. There is absolutely no escape. And unfortunately, underage girls are no exception. In one of the articles that I read, there was the case of a 16-year-old girl who is one of the orphans who frequently cross the borders between China and North Korea. She was caught by a guard, and she was also raped by the guard who caught her repeatedly. So, conclusions. While I would love to be in a position to provide sound recommendations, I'm afraid that there won't be a point. Every paper either calls on North Korea to respect human rights, like, Kim Jong-un spends his weekends reading our papers, or on the international community to do more, but, more on what and how exactly, no one truly knows. And there is no specific strategy mentioned. My opinion is that women are slowly developing more and more agency in North Korea, and that this will be a catalyst in how they will be treated in the future. This session was just the tip of the iceberg in what women face, both when in North Korea and when they attempt to escape. When they escape, the literature was also rather mixed in terms of agency. On the one hand, they are presented as naive beings who get trafficked, shifting the blame on women. And on the other hand, they get judged as using or utilizing their femininity to get out of the country. I find both points of view rather disappointing. On the one hand, viewing them as mindless or naive who don't know better, and on the other hand, judging them for wanting to escape and using whatever means they might have. Thankfully, feminist readings are gaining ground, so at some point we will be able to move on from blaming women for wanting a normal and safe life to perhaps examining actual policy. There's part of my references in case anyone is interested. I can send you the readings, but that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eyrin, for that presentation. It was very interesting, especially the points that you made where we would think that the experience of women in North Korea would be very different, but actually they parallel a lot of what's going on in the rest of the world. So I'd now like to open this up for questions. But the first question actually came through the chat, and it's from Leila. So she said, what happens to women who are unable to bear children, PCOS, endometriosis, etc.?
This is a question that I was also thinking of while I was working on the presentation, and thank you very much for asking it. So I believe that what happens is what will happen to any woman around the world, especially like 10, 20 years ago, she will be awfully judged for it. These topics are not really into the daily North Korean conversation. More often than not, even if, let's say, it is the husband who cannot have a child, no one's going to blame the husband. The blame will only be on the woman. She will bring, let's say, shame on her family. From part of the literature that I read, it mentions that more and more women do not really care about having husbands and children, which is interesting to see in North Korea. So I guess that while there is no punishment, because it wouldn't really make sense to punish someone for it, even in North Korea, you will definitely get judged by society, not by the state. I hope that covers it.
Okay, are there any other questions? You can raise your hand, or you can just speak directly if you prefer. I actually have a follow-up to Leila's question, and I'm not entirely sure if you would know this, but in terms of, say, infertility amongst women, we know that the majority of the time, depending on who is infertile, if couples are unable to have children, the risk of domestic violence goes up quite high. Do you know anything about that in the case of North Korea?
And not in relations to infertility. I know that domestic violence is a problem, and it's a major problem because domestic abuse, there's no legislation on domestic abuse, and well, there is not even a clear definition of abuse, or a clear definition of, or a concept of marital rape. But that mostly has to do with the traditional place of women in North Korean society being less of than that of men, and not with infertility. I'm sorry, but I'm not aware of that. Interesting topic, though.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions? If not, I have another.
Sure.
Well, I just found it really interesting that you mentioned how women use fashion and kind of designers to stand out. What do you think of that in, it's such a contrast from the idea of North Korea, from the idea of the communist society that they've set out, to kind of women are making use of capitalism to actually increase their social capital, to gain husbands, to further their lives better?
I'm not really sure if I understood the question.
So the idea of, Kim Jong-un's wife, she's always dressed up with designers, high fashion, very expensive. This goes so much against, the North Korean ideals, because this is the foundation of capitalism, especially related to women. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on the idea of women using very capitalist ideals of their appearance and elevating their appearance, and still being portrayed as the perfect woman in a society that doesn't value, or isn't supposed to value, this at all.
You see, I did mention this in this specific presentation, but I have it in another presentation that I did for uni. The most wanted job for women in North Korea is it's not a police officer, it's a traffic officer, directing the flow of the traffic for the cars in Pyongyang. And why is that? Because those women are supposed to be the prettiest, and they're supposed to have the most high quality and nicely tailored uniforms, even by the state. And this is something that that tourists come into frequent contact with. So I think that certain elements of people wanting to actually dress up and capitalism are bound to appear in North Korea and have appeared in North Korea. I understand the antithesis that you are pointing out on. Okay, we're a communist society, a social society, and we must adhere to the rules, and no one must stand out. And perhaps, this is one of the reasons why the authorities are cracking down on the illegal markets and then only allowing a few specific legal ones to be out. So we do see an increase in makeup and all of that in the common women, or in the powerful women, the women belonging to powerful families in the capital, where the elite lives. I think that when it comes to a country like North Korea and countries like North Korea before North Korea, there is always an imbalance between how the elite lives, behaves, and in the means that they have compared to the commoners, the simple people out there who are just struggling to survive. And her Isolju's role is, the way I see it from my point of view, is she's there to, let's say, inspire the people, or be this image of the beautiful mother of the nation, the mother of the future leader of the country. So she must be pretty, and inevitably, if she's that admired and if her image is portrayed that much, people will want to imitate her, to go to wear similar clothes or similar handbags. So up to a certain extent, it is being not just tolerated by the state, from my point of view, but also kind of encouraged, but not too much. We allow a little bit of breathing room to the people, but let's not push the limits, hence the crackdowns.
Yeah, I just find it very interesting that we often think of North Korea as the most extreme example, but women are still making use of the same avenues that women have used for years to try and exert their agency and kind of elevate their status and get more equality. So we have another question. Yeah. We have another question on the chat. Based on this last question, can the crackdown on illegal markets be a way for them to maintain the status quo of gender norms, like subconsciously not allowing the women to earn more bread? I remember you saying that women are allowed to earn more than the man legally, but what if the men aren't okay with that? And so it being legal doesn't matter so much.
Well, definitely what is legal does not matter that much in the country, I can guarantee that. So isn't can the crackdown on illegal markets be a way for them to maintain? Yes, of course it is a way for them to maintain the status quo and the gender norms. I don't really think that the regime is into that, is really into social theory and sociology to consider that we will do this. So from a sociological point of view, we will maintain gender norms. That's not their point. The point is to crack down on the economy as well. But North Korea is deeply rooted in patriarchy. And of course, all great leaders so far have been men, and the women were just there to be the women and the mothers of the nation. They were not there to be themselves. They were not recognized as individual things. So for the men, perhaps, who participate in the raids, it might be subconsciously or even consciously in their mind that, okay, women there are doing their own thing. How dare women step out of the house and do that? That will show them. I think that not just with the crackdowns, but also with the bribing that women have to do when they bring perhaps illegal stuff in the markets, because also the markets they sell illegal stuff like makeup, like perhaps South Korean products. I do believe that there are deep roots of gender norms and patriarchy to all of these guards and security agents requesting or demanding sex in return for, not arresting those women for what they do. That's deeply gendered. So while women are legally allowed to out-earn their husbands and men in general, of course the men are not okay with it. And the recent rise of women in terms of the shadow economy that is being developing has not really been that well perceived. I remember while I was working on a similar presentation for a class, there was a saying that a woman and a broom need a good beating once per month to straighten up. Today I came across a saying said by women who participate in the market that the men are good to, because someone needs to look the house while, I'm at work and I cannot take care of what's happening in there. So we're having this conflict going on right now. And I don't think that anyone is okay with anyone at this stage in North Korea, but that is my point of view. But definitely what is legal does not really matter, especially when these women are engaging in illegal activities. Like, you can also see that way, oh, you're doing something illegal, I can punish you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Okay, well then, again, I have another point which I find really interesting. Like I said before, that we often think of North Korea as the most extreme case that we have available. But what struck me, especially when you were talking about sexual assault and sexual violence against women, is the parallels that can be drawn against so many women in what we consider to be developed, enlightened, democratic countries. When you look at the USA prison system, there is a huge amount of sexual coercion and sexual violence, which corresponds to what you were saying. If a woman doesn't do what a prison guard wants, she can be demoted from her job, she can be put in solitary. So I find it really interesting. And if you can kind of say, more like the women experiences are very, very similar across all country. Like, this is a shared female experience. Is there anything specific about being a woman in North Korea that stands out from what you've read, aside from what most women tend to experience, maybe in a lesser extent, but still?
I think that the concept of forced abortions is the first thing that struck me, and then the infanticide. Like, if the abortion doesn't work, the woman gives birth, the child gets killed. And while I understand the parallels, I would like to believe that this is something that doesn't happen in other parts of the world within the system. It is definitely striking to consider how many things some legal systems, we're not gonna name names, have with the North Korean legal system, and how much the guards care or do not care about what happens to women and how they get what they would like to get from prisoners. But I remember reading about a woman who, at at some point, you know, she was wondering how her fellow prisoners and colleagues in that specific line of business within the prison got the jobs that they had as troop leaders. And, you know, of course, it came out that they were being raped by the guards. But, you know, at that point, the point of view was that they were doing it willingly. So even within those conversations of talking about abuse within the system, we shift the discussion from rape to something that women do willingly, to perhaps, you know, not have it, not be tortured, not get tortured, not have like worse jobs within the prison, within the facility. Which again, if you think about it, the way that the literature handles North Korean women is again quite similar to how societies in the West tend to handle women in similar situations. It's quite disappointing if you think about it, the way that we end up talking about women in every kind of situation that has to do with sexual violence.
Yeah, it's almost like they don't consider coerced sexual violence or sexual activity as being sexual violence, which of course it is, because you could say yes and get a better job, or you could say no and face severe punishment. So yeah, you don't actually have a choice. You can't say yes or no. It's a choice between a better, you know, job, better circumstances, or torture. So that's not a choice.
You don't get to say, you don't have a choice, because these women, if they refuse the advances, they will get raped. So it's either rape or rape.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you say yes or no.
It's middle ground.
Yeah, but they consider coerced sexual activity as not being a form of sexual violence, which, I mean, is reflective of society in general. Were you asking for it? Did you go home with the guy? Like, it doesn't matter the context you're in. Coerced sexual violence is not considered sexual violence by the majority of countries.
It's quite sad to see that, but you know, even within these discussions, we're still moving the blame on women for surviving in certain situations. Like, how dare you survive?
Are there any further questions or even comments? Okay, if not, then I will end the recording here. And thank you for your attendance, and thank you, Eyrin, for the great lecture and the very interesting input afterwards.